In the Garden of Salvation raid, there's 4 total encounters and 2 jumping puzzle sections, each with their own chest. The description will have the timestamps for every major section of the raid if you need to skip around to a certain encounter or a chest location. I just want to make a note that this guide is comprised of different footage from multiple groups on different runs, mainly in order to get as much footage of the different roles and perspectives as I could, so if you see the names of my teammates changing often, that's why. The first encounter is what I'm calling the chase. Here you're going to learn the very first important mechanic, which is tethering. Somewhere on the right side of the starting room, you'll see a Vex box floating in the air. Only one person should shoot this box, which will tether anyone near it. When you're tethered, it sends you into a third-person view where you cannot shoot or use your abilities. To disable the tether, you should have someone who is not tethered shoot the box. You can tell if the tether is enabled or disabled depending on whether the box is closed or open. Forming a line of tethered players will allow you to daisy chain this tether in whatever direction you need to go. You're always going to be tethering one of 2 things throughout this raid. Either it's a plus sign cross looking object, or it's a relay. In the first encounter, you're going to be using the tether to open Vex doorways that have those plus signs on them. The plus signs always signify a point where you can connect the tether to activate something. In this case, remove the walls blocking the doorway. Before you tether to the door and begin the encounter, you should split up into 2 teams of 3 players each. Team A, which will be the people running first, and Team B, which will be the people babysitting the boss first. Team A will tether themselves from the box to the doorway, which will start the first encounter. As soon as the wall is removed, Team A should begin running forward and killing any enemies in their way. You've got hobgoblins, regular goblins, cyclops, and an overload champion. So if you're a lower power level, it's a good idea to have one of those overload mods equipped. After clearing out all the enemies, a Vex Hydra called an Angelic will spawn. Killing the Angelic will release the cage around the next tether cube, which will be somewhere in the area close by the next doorway. Make sure every enemy is dead before initiating the tether, otherwise you'll be defenseless. Once you've opened the next doorway, hold your position and wait for Team B. During the events I just described, Team B's job is to stay behind, kill any enemies that are spawning in the start room, and babysit the boss. Every so often, the boss is going to spit out a glowing white cube called the Voltaic Overflow. One player must be ready to pick this up within like 5 seconds of it appearing, because otherwise it's going to detonate and wipe everyone. So it's extremely important to keep an eye on the boss at all times. When the boss spits out the Voltaic Overflow, one person should go jump into it. This will give that person a debuff called Voltaic Overflow for 2 minutes and 30 seconds. This simply means you cannot pick up another overflow until your debuff timer runs out, otherwise you will die. It's helpful to come up with an order for both teams in which you'll pick up the Voltaic Overflows. This way there is no confusion on who is getting the next one. When Team A opens the second door with their tether after they defeat the Angelic, the boss will disappear into the ground. As soon as that happens, the people babysitting him should run and meet up with Team A. The boss is going to reappear near where Team A is and start spawning more Voltaic Overflows. Since everyone who was already babysitting the boss now has the debuff, it's at this time when both teams switch roles. The team that was babysitting originally should now run ahead to the next area, clearing enemies, killing an overload champion, and killing the Angelic that spawns, as well as opening the next door with the tether, while the other team now stays behind with the boss, picking up the overflows to prevent the run from wiping. And once the next door is opened, you then switch roles again. So one team watches the boss, the other opens the door, and then you switch, and you repeat that until you've opened all of the doorways. Once you have, all 6 players should run through the field of Cyclops. It's best to have everyone use their supers here, or use snipers at least, to take out the Cyclops quickly because they don't mess around. In this sprint to the finish, the boss will spawn 3 final overloads, which should be picked up immediately, just like before. If you can at least get people over there to pick up the Voltaic Overflows, even if it means they're gonna die because they already have the debuff, it's absolutely worth sacrificing, because as long as you get to the end of this field and pick up the 3rd Voltaic Overflow, that's the end of the first encounter. A coordinated team shouldn't need to sacrifice anyone just to pick up the debuffs, but it is an option just in case. This first encounter and the second one, you don't really have any bosses to face, so you're going to want to focus on ad clearing and taking out tanky enemies. The only other thing I would add is equipping an overload mod from your artifact onto one of your weapons to help stun the champions that appear. There are only overload champions in this first encounter, and while it's not necessary if you're a high power level, it definitely helps. On screen now, you're seeing the location of the first raid chest from where you drop down after the first encounter. The second encounter is what I'm calling the maze. Your goal here being to activate and defend 4 relays, sometimes referred to as confluxes by raid groups, which if done successfully, opens the middle of the maze, which reveals a 5th and final relay that everyone defends together. The 4 relays are located at each points of this diamond, which represent the second encounter space. Each point being a named location that you can see beneath your minimap when you get there. But if that's too confusing, you can simply call them directions like north or south, or top, bottom, left, and right if you want, whatever's easiest for your raid group. Each location also has a tether box and a pair of teleporters on the right and the left that take you to the right and the left after they've been activated. The tether box is once again very important here because tethering it to a relay gives all tethered players a buff called Enlightened that lasts for 45 seconds. Being Enlightened allows you to break the white shields off of any Vex that try and approach the relay that you're defending. If you run out of the buff, you won't be able to break the shields, and the Vex will sacrifice to the relay. And if too many sacrifice, it causes everyone to wipe. It's worth noting that you also need a minimum of 2 players to completely connect the tether to the relay. To begin the encounter, get rid of the Vex in front of you. This spawns an Angelic Hydra, which you should also kill immediately. You'll want to split up into 3 teams of 2 players each. 2 players will stay here at Underbrush to defend the first relay, and use the tether to get the Enlightened buff. The second team of 2 heads down the left path leading towards the Thicket relay, while the third team of 2 heads down the right path leading towards the Alcove relay. When those teams of 2 get to their relay, they're going to have to defeat 2 barrier champions, so make sure to have anti-barrier mods equipped as they are kind of necessary in this encounter, even at a higher power. You'll also have to kill 1 Angelic Hydra at each relay and some other red bar enemies. Defeating the Angelic will activate the portals, and each team can tether to the relay to get their Enlightened buff. Once both Thicket and Alcove or left and right relays are clear, 1 person from each can meet at the topmost relay, aka Hedges. Together they'll kill the barrier champions and clear the Angelic, which will mean all portals should now be active. So at this point, you'd have a team of 2 at the bottom relay and a team of 2 at the top relay, with a solo defender at the left and right relays. Because those players on the right and left are alone, they won't be able to refresh their Enlightened buff by themselves. This means you're going to need 2 floater players. 1 player from the top should be a floater, and 1 player from the bottom should also be a floater, both of them moving between the relays to help the other teammates with refreshing their buff and killing the Angelics. The 2 floaters should be the only players who have to move around. Everyone else should stay in their designated area. Having 2 floaters is also important because eventually 3 Angelic Hydras will spawn at a random side. It can be difficult to kill them all alone, so call for a floater if they spawn on your side. These 3 Angelic Hydras will spawn once at each of the 4 relays, and once they have all been defeated, the middle of the maze will open up. Everyone should run to the center and get the Enlightened buff by tethering the middle relay. There will be Angelic Hydras, Harpies, and other enemies spawning. Simply kill all of them and refresh your Enlightened buff when needed to finish Encounter 2. The third encounter is the first boss fight of the raid. Here you'll be fighting a giant harpy called the Consecrated Mind. The goal of this encounter is to obviously kill the giant harpy, but to do so you have to bank a total of 30 motes to overload one of the relays, which the boss will then go to, starting the damage phase. There are 2 parts to this fight, the first being the Voltaic Overflow from Encounter 1 with a twist, and the second being collecting motes. This means you'll also need to split everyone up into 2 teams, one for collecting and banking these motes, and the other for dealing with the boss. To begin, have everybody link the tether to the relay in the middle of the room. Once the boss spawns, one of the 4 relays from the last encounter will be lit up. It's pretty easy to see from the middle of the room. Just look around and you'll see a giant beam of light shooting upwards from it. If you can find that relay, that's the one you must defend, and the same relay you'll be banking motes at. The mote team should kill the Minotaur that spawns in the beginning of the fight and let one person collect all 5 motes. Splitting the motes up between players is only going to make things more confusing and make the fight take longer, so don't do it. The player who collected the 5 stack of motes should then head to the relay that is lit up, and when they bank those motes, they'll receive the enlightened buff, which just like the last encounter lets them break the shields on the Vex that are trying to reach said relay. The other 2 mote collectors should be killing the next Minotaur that spawns. Let only one person pick up all 5 motes, and then hang around and wait for the next Minotaur to spawn. You want to try and have the 2nd and 3rd mote collectors bank 10 motes each to speed up the fight. Since you need 30 in total, our team started by banking 5, and then 10 more, and then a final 5 motes to start the damage phase. This is not a required method, but I found it to be the easiest. You should try and kill the Minotaurs as quickly as possible and head back to the relay because you only have 45 seconds until the defender's enlightened buff runs out. Once a player gets back to the relay and banks their motes, the other defender can then head back to middle to help kill the Minotaur. As long as you're constantly swapping out a player to always have someone with the enlightened buff, you won't have any issues with defending. One thing to note is out of the side pathways, explosive harpies are going to be spawning and start swarming the middle area. It's best to take them out as soon as you see them, otherwise they're going to create hell for everybody trying to collect motes and follow the boss. You can stand up on pillars above these harpies in the middle of the room, but it's easier to take them out as soon as you see them before they even get there. Meanwhile, the other team of 3 is making sure everyone doesn't wipe because of the voltaic overflow mechanic. When the encounter begins, after a few seconds of hanging around in the middle, the boss is going to decide on one of 4 places to go. Our team designated these places top, bottom, right, and left, but you can also do north, south, east, and west if you want. In our group, we called the rotating platform section to be top, since that's the way you're facing when you link the initial tether. So the boss will decide to go in one of 4 directions, and whichever way he goes, you should call it out so that the boss team knows where to follow him to. Once he reaches the end of these areas, he's going to spit out a voltaic overflow. One player should enter this voltaic overflow just like in the first encounter, but instead of jumping in and running away, being inside the overflow means you are now detained. A few seconds after someone is detained, the boss is going to open up, revealing both an outer circle and an inner circle of lights on each of his 3 fins. From the outside, all of the lights are red, but if you're detained inside the overflow, you will only see one ring of lights lit up, either the outer ring or the inner ring. Whoever is detained within the overflow should communicate to their teammates on the outside which ring of lights is lit up, because shooting any of the wrong ones will instantly kill the detained player. It is always going to be either the inner ring or the outer ring, never a combination of the 2, so keep the callout simple by just saying inner or outer. While shooting all of the eyes is easily 2-manable or even soloable with something like Izanagi's Burden, because each normal Izanagi's Burden shot insta-kills the eye even at 920, you're going to have the easiest time with a full team of 3, where everyone takes 1 light, also known as his eyes. We found that the easiest way to set this up was always have the person reading be in charge of the top section of lights. You can see there's 3 main fins on the boss when he opens up, and each fin has 2 lights on it, the inner and outer ring, so someone will always have to take each one. Every time someone gets detained, they will get the voltaic overflow debuff, where they cannot be detained again or else they will die. Since you only have 3 players to read on the boss team, eventually you will need to sub in a player from the mote collector team who doesn't have the voltaic overflow debuff. Preferably a player already in the middle of the encounter space or one that doesn't have any motes. Depending on how long you take to bank the motes, you may need to sub in multiple players from the mote team one at a time to be able to read. If you're following the method of banking 5, 10, 10, and then 5, it should only take you 4 to 5 times of preventing the wipe mechanic to get to the damage phase. The damage phase begins once you've banked 30 total motes, so keep track of the total number you've banked so far. If any Vex sacrifice to the relay, you may have to bank more, but it's not clear how many. After banking 30 motes, the boss will either spit out one final voltaic overflow or head straight to the relay depending on your timing. You'll know it's time to start the damage phase if you see the text, "The Consecrated Mind is drawn to the overloaded relay." As soon as you see this text pop up, immediately run to the relay that your defenders have been protecting and get ready for damage. When the boss gets to the relay, he's going to open up his fins again, this time revealing a ton of glowing eyes. You'll have to destroy all of them until they disappear and his center eye turns white. While shooting the eyes, or preferably before, you're going to want to set up a Well of Radiance with Lunafaction boots right on the boss and a Ward of Dawn bubble behind the Well of Radiance so that you can dip in and get that 35% damage increase. One trick you can use here is one player runs Tractor Cannon and they can get behind the boss and boop him with it to keep knocking him forward a little bit, which can extend the time you have for damage since it takes him longer to get back to the middle. Even with the help of Tractor Cannon, you will still need to keep chasing the boss down the pathway because a wall will eventually pass in front of you that doesn't let you shoot past it. This means you can't just stay at the place where you dropped your well initially, you're going to have to keep following the boss down the path. Once the boss makes it back to the middle, he's going to go immune and almost immediately begins heading to one of the 4 areas to spawn another voltaic overflow, starting another round of the encounter in which you have to bank another 30 motes at a different relay to get to the second damage phase. Simply split back up into 2 teams, one for the motes and one for the boss, and repeat everything you just did to beat the 3rd encounter. Here's the location of the 2nd raid chest in between the 3rd and 4th encounter. The final encounter against the Sanctified Mind is as buggy as it is hectic. There's a lot of mechanics in play here and unfortunately they don't always work, so let's hope I can at least prepare you for some of them that might bug out. Before beginning, divide everyone into 2 teams. Left team, aka light, and right team, aka dark. The goal of this encounter is again to bank 30 motes, but this time it's per team instead of together. Banking these 30 motes in both teams' relays will prepare the damage phase in which you must utilize the tethering mechanic from earlier in the raid to both start and extend this damage period. Shooting the boss is going to begin the fight, spawning a few waves of goblins and an angelic hydra. Shortly after killing the hydra, if you look at the boss, you'll notice he has 2 glowing lights on his body. One light is on his shoulder and one light is on his knee. These are crit spots that you can shoot and destroy, and destroying these lights will spawn in a portal. Destroying his shoulder will spawn in the right side portal, the orange dark portal, and destroying the light on his knee spawns the left side portal, the blue light portal. Every time you break the boss's shoulder or knee, it causes a few things to happen. It opens up a portal that allows you to send a teammate through it to an island where they can collect motes from killing enemies, which they can then bank at their relay. If any teammates are on the island when opening the portal, they are immediately pulled back. It also spawns a Cyclops on a pillar on your side of the encounter space. And finally, it causes the boss to do a slam attack, which removes a random chunk of the ground on whichever side activated their portal, and the only way to get it back is to rebuild it by connecting tethers from the tether box above your relay to the plus signs near the missing platforms. So let's run through how the fight plays out. You separate into a right and left team, you kill the angelic and the goblins. When his shoulder and knee light up, then you send one person to teleport to the island where they should collect a maximum of 10 motes, and as soon as the portal opens, it's going to spawn a Cyclops on the corresponding side, one that you should immediately kill before it wreaks havoc on literally everyone in your fire team and completely ends your run. While one of your players is collecting motes, you and your teammates should be first clearing all the enemies that you can, and secondly, If you're not being shot at by loads of Vex, you should try and rebuild any lost land that the boss destroyed. Like I mentioned earlier, opening your portal means the boss is going to take land from your side through its slam attack, and you'll be able to tell which chunk he's taking by the red glowing effects around it. If you see that happening, you should quickly move away from it, because whenever a chunk of land is disappearing or even reappearing from you rebuilding it, standing on it or even just near it can kill you. To rebuild lost land, you'll need to locate the plus sign either in front of it, behind it, or if it's the end piece, to the side of it. You'll then have to use the tether box with your teammate to get the tether to connect to the plus sign and rebuild that lost land. The glitchiest and hardest part of this encounter is getting the tether to work and trying to rebuild the land while not being able to shoot or manage any other mechanics. Building is necessary though, because you will need a place to stand while doing damage and just to survive in general. But don't risk your life to build back land if you've got hordes of Vex incoming, because chances are you're going to get caught up in the tether and won't be able to get away. If you're having issues and can't seem to get away from the tether, ask a player from the other team to shoot your tether box, disabling it to free you. So you're trying to rebuild land and fend off Vex while your teammate is collecting motes. Once he has 10 motes, he should let his team know when he's ready to return. To bring back a player from the island, you will need to shoot the exact same light on the boss's body again that you used to send them in. This pulls them back and also reopens the portal. As soon as the portal reopens and a player returns, you should send a second teammate in to collect 10 more motes. This way you'll always have a player going to get motes so they can dunk them and have the enlightened buff, which is necessary for defending your relay from the Vex with the shields. If your side is having trouble, don't be afraid to ask for the other team's enlightened player to help you break the shields of the Vex if they aren't already doing so. Like the third encounter, you'll need more motes for every Vex that sacrifices, and if too many of them do, it's game over. You should be able to avoid this though by sending each player on your team to get motes once, as everyone bringing back 10 at a time means you'll only have to make 3 trips. But in the event that Vex are getting too close to your relay and no one can help break the shields, you can pull a player back early as long as they have at least 1 mote to bank. Remember that a Cyclops appears whenever the portal is open. To make it easy, we put the responsibility of killing the Cyclops on the person being teleported out, because when they come back to the main area, they have a pretty good line of sight to the Cyclops already, but everyone should still be aware of it and be ready to help kill it just in case. Also remember to rebuild any ground you can in the short moments before the shielded Vex spawn. It's best to ask for other teammates to cover you while you try and rebuild. The second you deposit your team's 30th mote, you'll see a message pop up that says the tether is pulsing with some kind of energy, either light or dark. That begins the next phase. A new angelic Hydra spawns, along with a handful of Vex, which should all be killed quickly. You'll then see a giant glowing plus symbol in the air near the boss. If the symbol is white, then the light side tether must be chained to this floating symbol. And if the symbol is orange, the dark side's tether must be chained to it. There is a platform at the front of this area that the third guy can stand on so that the tether can reach the symbol. Tethering this symbol begins the damage period, but hold on because the boss still has one more card to play. He's going to rise up into the air, summoning the symbol he previously did not summon. So if you had to connect the orange tether first, you'll get a white symbol next. Sometimes this can bug out and show you a white symbol even if you got a white symbol first. Just ignore this and remember that you should always do the opposite of the first symbol you got. As soon as he begins to rise up into the air, a team of 3 should immediately get into position to chain that corresponding tether to the boss to prevent his wipe mechanic. You want to attempt to connect a second tether to the boss within about 3 to 5 seconds of him rising up into the air, which if done successfully will start the real damage period. For tethering during this phase, you have 2 main strategies. You can either A, designate 3 players to always be in charge of chaining both tethers during the damage phase, or B, leave the responsibility to each team separately. In our run, we had a dedicated team of 3 players who were in charge of tethering both sides, while everybody else stayed back and did damage the entire time, and it worked out pretty well. The only thing you have to avoid during this strategy is making sure that you stay far enough away from the people who are tethering, or it's going to mess up their chain. It's usually best to try and find a place to do damage from that is on solid ground, which is one of the reasons you want to keep trying to rebuild that land that you lose. Put your bubble down, put that well down, and then go to town with damage. The damage phase isn't incredibly long, but it's long enough to one phase if you're a high enough power. And that's really the entire boss fight. Nothing special happens after the first damage phase ends, you just have to repeat the entire fight until you kill him. This final encounter is without a doubt going to be the most frustrating because of the bugs that happen while either trying to tether or rebuild platforms, or even when moats fall through the ground. But if you can find a rhythm and execute these mechanics well enough, you'll eventually get it. That's the entire raid start to finish. The raid exotic is Divinity, which is not an RNG drop, but rather a quest you can start in Patrol that has you finish it within the raid. Please let me know if this guide was helpful, and if it was, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up on the video. And until next time, thank you for watching.